You'll hear from this brilliant group of women who in their own ways are smashing that glass ceiling and making their way for the next generation. So please join me in welcoming first Kenna Danilou. She is Burlington Chamber of Commerce 2020 Distinguished Entrepreneur Award winner. Phew, I got that right. And also happens to be president, CEO, and founding partner of Danilou and Mann Professional Corporation. So welcome, Kenna.
Thank you.
We also have Karen Roche, our first female fire chief with the Burlington Fire Department. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
Maude Leger is also joining us this morning, founder of Sold Right Away, Inc. And last but certainly not least is Melissa Pollard. She is Chief Executive Officer of Big Brothers Big Sisters. Thank you, ladies, all for being part of our first panel of the day. And over to you, amazing trailblazers.
Thank you so much. Thank you again, Shauna, for warmly introducing all of our panelists today. What an incredible group of leaders we have to talk about blazing the trail. Welcome, thank you so much. And Maude is also the chair of our board of directors. So not only is she a fantastic entrepreneur within our community, a real trailblazer in the private sector, she also is very deeply embedded in the nonprofit space and gives very generously of her time. So thank you so much. So I wanted to get the panel started with an initial question this morning. We have representation from, as I mentioned, private sector, public sector, nonprofit. Wonderful that we have so many shining examples of leaders. We are going to have some time for questions at the end from the audience. So again, use the chat function. But I'd like to maybe start with Kenna, and I'm going to ask each of you to comment on this. What does blazing the trail really mean to you? And how have you blazed the trail in your journey thus far?
First of all, good morning, everyone. It's super nice to be here. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, CN. It's a great honor to be on this panel. Blazing the trail, I guess, is really maybe forging a path that hasn't been taken before, or maybe that you actually haven't taken before. So for me, my profession is a relatively old and conservative one. I am a CPA, CA. However, about 16, 17 years ago, I discovered that there was a service area that really hadn't been taken care of in Canada before, and that was the music and entertainment industry. So I quit my job, my very good job, and started a business in my spare bedroom with just me and 2 little kids. And I did have a husband who was very supportive. And from there, it actually grew to be the largest of its type in Canada. And at first, it was actually the only type. So I guess that is sort of how I blazed a trail.
Mm-hmm. Karen, I'd love to hear from you. You certainly have smashed through the glass ceiling in a very male-dominated industry. Tell us a bit about your journey.
Thank you and good morning, everyone. And thank you for having me again, or having me for the first time. When I think about blazing a trail, I compare it to doing something that nobody else has done before. Others may follow you in doing the similar types of things and paths. But when I was first hired in Burlington, I can tell you that there were already 2 female firefighters in Burlington that were here before I came here. And I would consider them the true trailblazers then, because they would have been coming into a boys club type of environment when there were very, very few women. And so when I became a training officer here in Burlington in 1998, I was the first training officer. I was probably, I think at that time, if I remember correctly, I was the first in the province of Ontario. And then when I left Burlington to go to Hamilton Fire in 2003, I actually was the first female training officer there, the first chief of training there, and the first assistant deputy chief in Hamilton, only to return back into Burlington in 2014. I remained the deputy until last year. When I changed in management, I took over as the acting chief. And as it stands right now, I'm the full-time chief. So it's been very humbling, I have to tell you. It's being first is not always what it's cracked up to be, especially in a male-dominated profession. I would love to say that I was never tested. You're constantly having to prove yourself time and time again. But, you know, rather than giving in to those who didn't think or didn't want me there or felt I didn't belong, I just persevered. I persevered because I enjoyed it. And I think that over time, that quiet determination and people begin to know you and trust you, I think at that point then I knew I was in the right place. So yeah, it took a lot to overcome different stigmas, but certainly once you've landed and you realize that, then you know you've made it. So yeah, and I'm still here.
Well, we're certainly looking forward to hearing more about your story and your journey in just a few moments. Mona, I'm going to go over to you. Tell us a little bit about your career trajectory, because you had some very interesting experiences early on in your career. You were defying the status quo, blazing a trail in a very different industry.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on this panel. Glad to be able to share my story. I always say, like, I started from nothing. I've always had this entrepreneurial background where I started businesses. I was like 7 and 8 years old and kept going and empowering people and my friends to join this business. And then I just moved on really young. I was still in high school when I moved out and started working. And it's just went into the newspaper industry, media industry, TV industry, very male dominated. And it was just, I just had no concept of being female would not work for me until I encountered this. And then I started realizing that I had to have the courage to put myself out there and work hard and prove myself and do the right thing. Like, a lot of times there were shortcuts that I could have taken, and I just decided, no, like, I'm gonna do the right thing. I'm gonna move. I've had experiences in TV industry where I wouldn't get the job I wanted, but I just kept showing up, and then they would say, wow, this girl really works hard. And then I would go up like that. And for me, blazing the trail was about being an entrepreneur, being a mentor to people I would meet and I would hire and I would have in my team and my clients, even just to anyone who would be willing to listen to me.
Thank you. Melissa, we'd love to hear from you. How have you been blazing the trail? I mean, you're in the not-for-profit space, leading an organization that's incredibly important to our community.
Yeah. No, I appreciate the opportunity, and good morning, folks. Good morning, everyone. So I actually considered, I love that Dr. Nutt said that feminism is a process and not history. And so what I look at in terms of blazing the trail is sort of, what are some key things I want to model for those around me and those who may come after me. And so when I thought about that, it's one thing I love to model is showing up as your full self. So I think so often as humans, we want to put people into a box, right? Because it's easy for us to understand. So if you're a woman and you lead a certain way, you're in a box. If you're a man, you're going to lead a certain way, it's a box. And I think what I ended up doing early in my career is really modeling myself after those boxes, because I thought that was the only way I could be successful, and that I was terrified to step out of those boxes for fear that that would lead me to be a failure. And so what I had to learn was that by modeling and showing more of me, I can make jokes. Showing more of me is also talking with my hands, as you've noticed, but it's like I can dress, speak, and behave as all of my full self, and that's leadership. And I think what's beautiful about that in terms of blazing the trail is I'm hoping that more folks now see themselves reflected in me, because before, the view or the mirror was very limited, if that makes sense in my mind. The other thing I wanted to talk about is just modeling, extending ourselves grace. So I loved when Dr. Nutt talked about self-doubt and how women, there's no person more vicious I've found than a woman criticizing herself. And so I really just want to encourage all of you to extend yourself grace and model extending yourself that grace. we're going to make mistakes. We're not going to be perfect is a fake concept, by the way. And so the more that we're able to model extending ourselves grace and grace to those around us, I think that's a trail I think we all want to blaze for ourselves and future generations. And then lastly, can you bear with me? I talk a lot. So, so lastly is that you actually don't blaze the trail alone. We do it together. And I'm going to have Karen hook me up because Karen's really great with the quotes and she's got like a whole list of them. But I've heard the proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. And if you want to go far, go together. So to be cheesy, I feel like if we're all working together to blaze that trail, it leaves a much larger path, right, for those that come behind us. So yes, those are really how I sort of try to model those three pieces to folks around me.
So it's interesting that you mentioned that proverb because that was actually written on the whiteboard in my office on the last day that we were in the office before we went into our pandemic related closure. So thank you so much for that. And you know, you touched on something there about extending grace to ourselves. I think it's also important that we extend grace to others because one of the things that was surfacing in the chat just a few moments ago is that, you know, it's one thing to talk about how men can support women, but there are also too, you know, sometimes this prevailing sentiment that women can be actually quite vicious towards one another. And so, you know, so I think, you know, to your point, extending that grace to one another, you know, is really, truly very important. So.
Very true.